change, the auto dealership got in consideration that in case you do not pay, that mom and dad will pay. That's their consideration. The third party gets the car. So that's a third party contract. Two people contract for the benefit of a third party. Now, but what happens? Because generally, without a cosigner, people don't want to enter into agreements with minors. There is a problem. And the problem is this. Two teenagers decide to get married and have a kid, and they want to rent an apartment, and they're both working, and they have the money, and they go to lease it, and the landlord says, forget about it. Because both of you are minors, and says, both of you are minors, you know, you can trash the place and tomorrow say, I don't have a lease, and void my contract. That's a problem, because minors then would not be able to contract. And there is two exceptions in my problem. Exception number one, minors lose their incapacity, like being a minor's incapacity, when they do certain acts that are called acts of emancipation. You've heard that word before? Emancipation? Yes. The word emancipation means freeing. A minor becomes freed when they get married, when they have a child, when they join the military. Okay? The last one is when they sue their parents for the fact of getting emancipated. And I say that example in every one of my classes, and I've been practicing law since 1987. I haven't seen one minor sue their parents to become capacitated. Okay? It doesn't happen, but it could, and because it could, I've got to mention it to you. Now, the question is, why? Well, if you're married, you, the couple, needs to be able to contract. And you need to be able to assure the landlord, look, contract with me because the law will not abandon you because I become emancipated. Now the landlord is more likely to contract with you. Now, there are certain types of contracts that, irrespective of whether or not you're emancipated, contracts that, irrespective of whether or not you are an adult, are still binding upon minors. And it's easy to identify which ones they are. Contracts for shelter. Why? Because you don't want minors to be out in the street if they can pay to be in a place because they are incapacitated. So contracts for shelter, the minors cannot void. Contracts for health care. You don't want the minor to go to the hospital and the hospital say, you're a minor, you're never going to pay us, so you're not getting health care. So to assure the hospital that the minor is going to pay as long as they receive the health care, contracts for health care to a minor, the minor can't walk away. Some would argue, let me say this again, some would argue, so it's not clear, that contracts for education are considered to be necessities. Okay? So, shelter, food, medical treatment, and possibly education are considered to be necessities where the minor can't walk away. Okay? And the reason for that is for the protection of the minor. Minors cannot walk away if they become emancipated. If they have done one of those acts, gotten married, had a child, joined the military service, they sued mom and dad for emancipation. Okay? The people that I've actually heard of, haven't seen, that have sued mom and dad for emancipation are often individuals who are in the entertainment business. Child stars who later say, mom and dad are misusing my money, and therefore I need to be emancipated from them because they've been mismanaging. Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears, when they were younger, were child stars, and then later as they grew, they argued that their parents mismanaged some of their money, and therefore the courts can intervene and say, you're now emancipated, your parents are no longer responsible for you. Okay? Any questions with regards to those contracts? Okay? No problems with regards to those contracts. Okay. Now, let's talk about the subject of a contract. The subject of a contract must be legal. the subject of the contract must be legal. In other words, if you contract to kill somebody, and they don't pay you after you've killed somebody, can you sue them in court?
No.
Of course not. And everybody knows that. So when I say they must be legal, that's what you're thinking about. You know, nobody's going to sue anybody else for murder, or, you know, I'm going to sell drugs for you, but you never paid me, and therefore I'm going to sue you. That doesn't happen. Okay? Generally, that takes care of itself. However, what we don't think about, and the real meat of this subject, is things that are illegal, but they're not morally, we don't anticipate that they're morally wrong. Okay? They're illegal, but we don't anticipate that they're morally wrong. For example, if you now have this big manufacturing company, and you're manufacturing computers, specialized computers, and you enter into a contract with the state of France to sell them, you know, $500,000 in computers. Is that a legal contract? I know you're waiting for me to say yes or no because you don't know, but you think it's a legal contract. You're sitting there going, yeah, that's a legal contract. As a matter of fact, show me how I can do that. It's a legal contract. You can't. However, if you enter into a contract with a country that the United States does not authorize you to, such as Cuba, such as Iran, both of those are probably going to become legal, but if you enter into certain contracts with Cuba, with Iran, with North Korea, even though the subject matter of the agreement, you're selling them cars, you're selling them light bulbs, even though the subject matter of the agreement may be completely legal if you had sold it to somebody else, because that agreement is not accepted by the American government, it's an illegal agreement. And because the subject matter of the agreement is illegal, it's unenforceable. Okay? It's unenforceable. There are agreements, however, that we enter into, and when we entered into them, they were legal. And then later the law changes, prohibiting one or the other party from being able to do it because now it's illegal. Okay? Let's say that you can enter into a gambling contract here in Dade County. You can bet on sports, you can bet on whatever, and then all of a sudden they changed the law and they made those agreements in Florida illegal. The subject matter of the agreement is illegal. When the subject matter of the agreement is illegal, the contract is invalid. The contract is invalid. Okay? Now, we can think about, right now, one big one that is currently being looked at are those internet sports betting. What is it? No, it's not fantasy. There is a big sports betting internet business that was advertising all over the place. DraftKings, right? And they're currently being sued by a number of secretaries, a number of attorney generals from different states, to suggest that that action, that activity is illegal. And arguably it is. Do you often wonder why it is that when you go on a cruise ship, when you get on the cruise ship, if you get on the cruise ship here in Dade County, you can't go immediately gamble? Do you know that? You can't go to their casino and immediately play games and gamble. You can only gamble when the ship travels beyond the territorial waters of the state of Florida. Not necessarily international, because there's a difference in the boundary between the state and the federal government. I think that the federal government extends 22 miles, where the state, the federal government 22, where the state is 12. So the ship waits to open its casino until that moment where the captain says, we are now beyond the territorial borders of the state of Florida, and therefore Florida laws prohibiting gambling within the state no longer applies. Now we're national, now you guys can gamble away. So if you are now gambling in the internet, the question that is being asked is, where does the gambling take place? Because DraftKings, I think, is in one of the islands, the main place of DraftKings. But if you place the bet here in Florida, Does the gambling take place there, or does it take place here, or does it take place in both places? So I think that ultimately it is going to be decided by the court whether or not those gambling agreements are enforceable. But if they're found to be unenforceable, that's a good example of an illegal subject of a contract. Okay? Illegal subject of a contract. Any questions with regards to contract? Now, I'm going to go back to some of the issues that we had originally when I said, do contracts have to be signed? And I'm going to take a little bit of the carpet from underneath your feet. I said to you that contracts don't have to be in writing. Okay? Don't have to be in writing to be enforceable. And most contracts are not, and you know that. However, there are some specific contracts. There are some specific contracts that must be in writing in order to be enforceable. And there is an ancient statute, an ancient law, that we've adapted from England and is incorporated in the United States that says which ones. Now, the real reason, let's go behind why contracts, written contracts, are often better than verbal or oral contracts. And somebody over here said, how do you prove it? How is it that you prove it? That's the point. Written contracts are easier to prove than verbal contracts. So, the law has said, look, there are certain types of contracts that we really want to be very clear. You're not going to sue Burger King if they didn't give you your food. You may throw a tantrum, you may yell at somebody, but you're not going to file a lawsuit because you didn't get your Egg McMuffin. Okay? But you might file a lawsuit if you didn't get a car. So let's look at these exceptions. Number one, if the contract is for value greater than $500. I have no idea why it's fixed at $500. At one point in time in our history, $500 was a lot, and it's still a lot, but it isn't as much value as it was. But contracts for greater than $500 must be in writing. Okay? I don't see many people suing somebody for $500 because it's going to cost you more to go to court and get a determination and collect than the $500. But contracts for $500 or greater must be in writing. Two, contracts for the following subjects: land, buildings, and fixtures must be in writing. Okay? That's these three are called real property. Contracts for real property must be in writing. Okay? And the reason for that is simple. When you die, this land's still going to be here. When your children die, this land's still going to be here. When your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren die, this land is still going to be here. Maybe underwater, according to what everybody says, but it's still going to be here. The state is going to be here long after you're gone. And what the state has said is, look, because the land is going to be here, and you're not, we want to be very clear in how that land is dealt with and transferred from party to party because we don't want any problems. You know, you're not going to be here, and we're going to have problems with the transfer of that land, so it's got to be in writing. It's got to be very, very clear. So contracts for land, buildings, fixtures for greater than $500 must be in writing. 3. And 3 is a little difficult to understand. It's not difficult to say, but there may be a little play on words that you may not understand. Number 1. Contracts that by their terms cannot be done within 1 year. Contracts that by the terms of the agreement cannot be performed within a year.